Good morning and good afternoon. I am an alcoholic. My name is Ashley. Thank you so much, Glenn, and to the group for having me today. It is always a pleasure, a delight, a humbling honor to be asked to speak in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Really delighted, especially to be speaking at home in Tennessee. I got sober in Franklin, Tennessee, just over yonder, about 3 hours away, in a Monday through Friday nooner, where I heard a lot of literature from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which ruined my drinking. And we're going to talk a lot about how the solution is found in literature published by AA and the Grapevine. I just want to get my screen set here in a good way. I do have a sobriety date. It is the 30th of December, 2006. I have not found it necessary to pick up a drink in that time. And I want to say a hearty and humble welcome to our newcomers, especially those of you who are counting days. Welcome. The first word of the first step is we. And I learned here in meetings, which are the fellowship, and in the literature and the program, which is the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, and the 12 concepts of service, that I never had to be alone again, and I never had to pick up a drink again one day at a time. So welcome. Please keep coming back. Please connect with other sober members of AA. If you don't already have one, please consider getting a sponsor. And I'm going to talk about what sponsorship means to me and how it's helped me stay sober. I do have a sponsor, and I rely on her in appropriate ways to help me stay sober and to help me, as it talked about in our daily reflections reading today, pass on the message of sobriety to other folks who want this way of life. And I have a home group. It's called the Beacon Group. We have a wonderful format. We really focus on the literature. And I sponsor other women here in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I'm going to try to carry a message. We'll see what my higher power has in mind. It asks in our book that we carry a message of depth and weight. I also hope that there's some levity and humor in there, because it says somewhere in our literature that we are not a glum lot and that we learn to insist on enjoying life. I've also read that the day I grow up is the day I learned to have a laugh at myself. And some of my drinking, while painful, was also pretty comedic. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I figured out that I am an alcoholic and what it looks like to work the 12 steps and 12 traditions and 12 concepts of service to me, and what life is like today, with maybe an emphasis on relationships, since Bill talks a lot in our literature about how relationships have been nearly always the cause of my woes, including my alcoholism. So to get started, I come from an alcoholic family system, and what does that mean? It just means that pretty much everybody in my family drank, and that alcoholism is a disease of relationships. And so all of my relationships were really affected by drinking and contaminated by drinking and distorted by drinking. And that in addition to the drinking, there was just a lot of what I call the ick. There was suicidality, there was untreated and undiagnosed mental illness. There was homicide and attempted infanticide and arson and just all the things that can come with untreated alcoholism. And it turns out that in a couple of cases, there was a little bit of recovery in there too. I have a great aunt, my great aunt Juanita, and she got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't know what it was like for her to work a program. And I hope that there's a big book in there that'll somehow make its way into my hands. But her life was different after she stopped drinking and got sober in AA, which must have been an interesting journey for a woman in rural Pennsylvania in the 1960s and 70s. And my papa, my mother's daddy, he was an alcoholic. And when he got into an argument with his second wife, he would apparently cross the bridge from Eastern Kentucky and go over to West Virginia and occasionally attend a meeting of AA. So, all of this means that there was a lot of alcoholism in the family, but that doesn't make me an alcoholic, right? So what makes me an alcoholic? And I'm going to read from the 4th edition of the big book. I like the big print because it gives me a chance to write notes and to highlight and to find my way around the page. In the doctor's opinion on Roman numeral page 19, it says, and I like to change it to I because I relate more to it when I say it in an I statement rather than when I'm reading about you, which then I just think talks about your alcoholism. I drink essentially because I like the effect produced by alcohol. And some of the ways that I work the steps and I work the big book is I turn these statements into questions and I write out my answers to these questions. So did I drink because I essentially liked the effect produced by alcohol? Yeah. The sensation is so elusive that while I admit it is injurious, yes, it was injurious to me, I cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false. To me, my alcoholic life seemed the only normal one. I was restless, irritable, and discontented unless I could again experience that sense of ease and comfort, which came at once by taking a few drinks. And this was so frustrating to me because it was drinks I saw other people take with impunity or without consequences, to use a substitute word for impunity. What does impunity mean? I saw other people drink without the emotional hangover, the physical hangover, without damage to their relationships. And then after I succumbed to the desire again, I would develop a phenomenon of craving, which the book tells me was my allergy to alcohol. And then I would pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging again remorseful, like regretful, And then I would have this firm resolution not to drink again, like Bill pounding his fist on the bar. How did I get here again? Which it talks about in Bill's story. How did it happen again? And then I would repeat it over and over. And then the book tells me that unless I experienced an entire psychic change, there was very little hope for my recovery. And that chapter really that paragraph really encapsulates and describes what my drinking looked and felt like. And then it's abusive to highlight a problem without also describing what the solution is. So fortunately, the book goes on to tell me what the solution is. And then on the other hand, as strange as this may seem to those who don't understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the same person, me, who seemed doomed, who had so many problems that I despaired of ever solving them, I suddenly find myself able to control my desire for alcohol, the only effort necessary being that to require a few simple rules. And I just want to read this other line from the previous page, which also describes me. It says, having lost my self-confidence, my reliance upon things human, my problems piled up on me and seemed astonishingly difficult to solve. So, I don't want to spend too much time talking about drinking because I live in the solution today, but I do want to qualify that I am an alcoholic. And some of what that looked like for me is, I would take that first drink, I would get this sense of ease and comfort, and it was very elusive. And so my solution was to try to drink more to recapture that initial sense of freedom, of sparkliness, of release. And then because I drank more and I got more impaired, I didn't have that sense of ease and comfort. And then my distorted thinking was like, well, that just means I need to have more. I mean, it was completely messed up and made no sense, but this is what I chased. And I chased it around bars. I chased it at home. I chased it at parties. I threw a lot of money at my alcoholism, and my attitudes were extremely distorted. And I just remembered this recently, that when I was in high school, I loved the American author F. Scott Fitzgerald, and I wanted to be like his wife and him when I grew up, which basically means I wanted to be a bankrupt, mentally ill, incurable alcoholic who died in a mental institution in a fire. Like, that's what I aspired to be. And I also remember I went to this private school and I had to cross the street for some reason, or I skipped class, and I went into this bar and I played something on the jukebox, and I wanted to be like the barflies who at 10:30 in the morning were hanging around in the dark, shadowy, spider webby corners. I mean, crazy thinking. And so fortunately, my sibling went to treatment for an eating disorder, and I was invited to her family program. And when I got to her family program, they said to me, you need to run to the Al-Anon family groups, which was highly confusing to me, because what did her snacking and being overweight have to do with me needing a program for friends and families of alcoholics? And I just knew I was in so much pain, and I was so grief-stricken from the childhood that I had had, that I was willing to follow these people's suggestions because they seemed to have something that I wanted. It turns out it was peace and serenity and a spiritual solution, because it was a treatment center that was based on the 12 steps. And I became willing to do what they suggested. And so when I left this treatment program, I did go to my first meeting of the Al-Anon family groups. And I just want to read something that AA, this is from an AA guidelines, relationship between AA and Al-Anon. And this is a declaration of appreciation that Al-Anon declared of AA's debt of gratitude to Al-Anon. And this was done in 1969 at the General Service Conference of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it just says, whereas it is the desire of this conference to confirm the relationship between Alcoholics Anonymous and the Al-Anon family groups, be it resolved that Alcoholics Anonymous recognizes the special relationship which it enjoys with the Al-Anon family groups, a separate but similar fellowship. And be it further resolved that Alcoholics Anonymous wishes to recognize and hereby does recognize the great contribution which the Al-Anon family groups have made and are making in assisting the families of alcoholics everywhere. So I went to my first Al-Anon meeting, but wouldn't you know, I shared from a book that was not published by Al-Anon. And because it was a healthy meeting, the chairperson of that meeting corrected me and said, hey, just for the time that we're here in an Al-Anon meeting, we only share literature published by Al-Anon. And I didn't know any better at the time. And so I was offended and I had got a resentment against Al-Anon and I wouldn't go back to Al-Anon. But of course I knew by that time that I needed the 12 steps to apply to my hole in the soul. So my only avenue of recovery left available to me was open meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's how I found the Nooner in Franklin, Tennessee, where I immediately went. It was an open meeting. And wouldn't you know, I started to hear the literature in great detail. And I was so lucky that Steve L. was attending that group on a regular basis. And so I was hearing a lot of fabulous recovery. And the next thing I knew, I had a head full of AA and a belly full of white wine. And AA ruined my drinking. And I was identifying with the literature and things like, it is the great obsession of every abnormal drinking that one day I will be able to control and enjoy my drinking. And then I read in the stories in the back things like, it's not how much I drink, it's what happens when I drink. And I read in the stories that AA doesn't teach me how to handle my drinking, it teaches me how to live with my sobriety. And so the next thing I knew, I was trying to control in my drinking again, and I just reached the up with which I could not put. I had another stinking hangover, an emotional hangover, and I was just like Bill when he finally hit his bottom, and I completely surrendered. And I said, I can't do this anymore. And I did have a sponsor at that time who was patient with me. And I called her and she wasn't available. So I called my recovery buddy because I had someone with whom I checked in every night. We talked about how we applied the slogans, keep it simple, easy does it, but for the grace of God, one day at a time, just for today. And then those are the slogans which have a special status in Alcoholics Anonymous and were published by the Grapevine. And then we have sayings that are helpful but don't have the special status of the slogans. Things like halt, did I get hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? And so I called my recovery buddy and she said, you know, Ashley, this is exactly how I felt when I hit my bottom with alcohol. This is how I felt. And so I learned the power of identifying with feelings, not so much how much I drank and did I have consequences and did I take the dump trunk all the way to the dump? You know, did I take the elevator all the way down to the basement? But the identification of the feelings. I mean, this is a woman who had been prostituted and was part of a human trafficking sex industry ring. So our circumstances were different, but we had that powerful identification of having hit our bottom with drinking. And I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and a guy who was there gave me his medallion because they didn't do desire chips. And it was a special medallion to him. It was a multi-decade medallion celebrating his long-term continuous sobriety. And it also happened to be the anniversary of his mother's death. But he had no problem passing this special chip on to me to help me consecrate my surrender in Alcoholics Anonymous and my desire to stay sober one day at a time, because that's the power of the fellowship in AA. Very special. And that's still my surrender chip. And I don't want to get a new sobriety date, so I'm hanging on to it. And so I immediately did a step one with my sponsor where I wrote out not only the history of my drinking career. I took my first drink in the 5th grade because I thought it would be cool. But my attitudes towards the institution of drinking, which I hope I've amply described as already being very warped, you know, and how I did things like call my own voicemail to leave these erratic, gibberish, quasi-religious, philosophical ramblings because I thought I was having such heightened states while I was drunk. And then the next day checking my voicemail and going, what is this incomprehensible blather? Only to realize it was myself when drunk. And when I read that to my sponsor, she said, Ashley, you know, that is not sane behavior. Boom, I was at step 2, you know, the opportunity to be restored to sanity. And so in step 2, our wonderful book has this chapter called To the Agnostic. And in the chapter To the Agnostic, it so emphasizes that I should, number 1, not have contempt prior to investigation, which it talks about in our appendix, about the spiritual experience. And it says that deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. And it also says for me just to use the word God as a placeholder for a higher power of my own conception. And if I have trouble or I trip up with the word God, to just substitute the word God for any other kind of word that can work for me. And that I am given that grace and that dignity here in Alcoholics Anonymous to try to find any kind of vocabulary that suits me. I only have to ask myself one short question. Do I believe, or am I even willing to believe? So it's a progressive question that can unfold for me over time, that there is a power greater than myself. And that's on page 47. And then this is my favorite, probably my favorite line in all of the literature. And it says, much to my relief, I do not have to consider another's conception of God. My own conception, however inadequate, and I love how gracious the literature is, that my own conception, however inadequate, is sufficient to make the approach and to effect contact with a higher power. As soon as I admit the possible existence of, and here are just some ideas for vocabulary, creative intelligence, spirit of the universe, underlying the totality of things, and here's a promise. I began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction. Provided I took other simple steps, I got to take some action here. I find that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek. And this is the big ding, 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 ding line for me that I really emphasize with the women I sponsor. To us, the realm of the spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all. And so I get to have the God of my own understanding, and that has changed and evolved over time. I mean, there was this time when I was in Eastern Congo where I do the kind of work that's so important to me and is really the hill on which I'm willing to die. And I completely lost a God of my understanding, and I was sobbing and I was inconsolable and I was snot slinging and I was trying to work steps 1, 2, and 3 on the situation in which I found myself. And I was grappling with my higher power concept, and I just thought it needed to be bigger and bigger and, you know, bigger than colonialism and bigger than exploitation and bigger than all the structural issues with which I had been confronted, and nothing was working. And I just opened this little envelope with which I travel, in which I have some sentimental mementos, and I found a writing from a spiritual man who's a giant of the 20th century, who means a lot to me. And I found a famous prayer of his in which it says, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm on the right path. Even if I were on the right path, I wouldn't necessarily know anything of it. But I have the desire to please you. And I hope I have the desire to please you in all I do. And I think that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I thought, that's enough. That's enough. My tears are sacred. AA gives me a safe container in which to fall apart. I can be okay not being okay. And the next thing I saw was a little picture of my kitty cat. And my kitty cat does not have a punishing bone in his body. He waits for me patiently in the morning after I've put him out off the bed, where he gives himself a bath and wakes me up. And I thought, that's the higher power I need. Personal, intimate, and private, who's patient and who waits and cares for me when I completely come undone and drop my basket. And I was able to settle down, to soothe my nervous system. And I was able to fall asleep and get up in the morning and move along with some peace in my soul and do the next good, right, honest thing. Now, other people outside of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous might think that that's nutty. But here in AA, I'm given the dignity of having these kinds of personal experiences with a realm of the spirit that is roomy and broad, because I was earnestly seeking. And so that's just an example of a step 2 experience that I have had. Now, in step 3, where I make this decision to turn my will and my life over to the care, and that's such an operative word for me, the care of my higher power. I wasn't cared for properly growing up. My family system did not work very well. And I just spent some time with Maureen, who has 41 years of continuous sobriety, which just blows my mind. She was my neighbor in the 11th grade when I lived alone for the second time as a child. I lived alone over in Franklin in this little ramshackled farmhouse in the 10th grade in the Williamson County school system, when no parent, no guidance counselor, no friend, no teacher, no neighbor, no one intervened on my behalf. I just lived completely alone. And then when I moved myself, because that didn't feel very good, to Kentucky to live with my other parent, that parent was active in his alcoholism and drug addiction, and he left me alone. And Maureen was my next door neighbor, and she at the time had 5 continuous years of sobriety in AA. And I just needed somewhere to do my laundry, and I knocked on her door one day, figuring out which patio went to her front door, and I just knocked on her door and I said, "Hi, I'm Ashley, can I do my laundry?" And she said, "Hi, I'm Maureen." And she let me do my laundry. And what we know about each other today is that her sponsor had just asked her to pray to her higher power to teach her how to love unconditionally, to learn how to love without transaction, as she put it, to learn how to love for fun and for free. And to this day, Maureen still says that I showed up on her front door and I was her gift from God. And when I first came into AA, so let me just say, Maureen did a lot for me that year. It was not her job to be my guardian, my parent. She says today that if she had known better, she absolutely would have reported to Child Protective Services. She would have sat down with me and we would have made a list. Who are your other relatives? Who are some people we can call? How do we get your family's act together? But this was 1984, and she did the best she could with the tools and information she had at the time. And she absolutely saved my life. And therefore, Alcoholics Anonymous saved my life when I was a kid, in addition to having saved my life when I came in with my drinking problem. And when Maureen became my first sponsor and I was working step 3 with her, and she taught me about this care that my higher power will take with my thoughts and my actions and my speech. She taught me that I could be a gentle person because I came in with so much rage from that childhood that I had. And the book says that there's no such thing as justifiable anger, but I learned that I did have a righteous indignation from that vulnerable, dependent, wounded child I had been, but that as an adult, I had become a rager, because I carried all of this and I had the opportunity to work through my relationships and everything that I carried that sort of wounded and contaminated and poisoned me because of the resentments that I had, which we obviously work on that I worked on in my 4th step. And so when this word care was introduced to me and I made the decision to be cared for and to become a more caring person, and I got on my knees with my sponsor and I made a decision to turn all of these things over, that was the beginning of the transformation of consciousness for me. And Bill talks so much in his letter about emotional sobriety. How do I close this gap between my highest values and aspirations and ideals, the kind of behavior I want to have, the practicing of these principles in my relationships, but then my feelings and my impulses and my instincts. There's such a journey into bringing those two things into alignment, into equanimity, into entrainment. And it starts for me when I make that decision, that I want to grow. I want to be more harmonious. I want to be more gentle. I want to be more loving. And then I got into my 4th step and I found out the things that I was not responsible for as a child. And I got to start taking responsibility for my thoughts, for my actions, for my speech in my fourth step. And I continue to do that. And it's not easy, closing this gap between what I want to be and who I want to be. And then sometimes the unruly, messy emotions that I still have. And I want to read from step 10 in the 12 and 12, because it talks about, I know I'm speaking a little bit about step 4 right now, but it talks so much about the value of inventory and why I take the time to get to know myself on such a profound level. And this is on page 89. And it says, aren't these practices joy killers as well as time consuming? Must I spend most of my waking hours drearily rehashing my sins of omission or commission? Well, hardly. This emphasis on inventory is heavy only because I have never really acquired the habit of accurate self-appraisal. Once this healthy habit is become grooved, it will be so interesting and profitable that the time it takes won't be missed. For these minutes and sometimes hours spent in self-examination are bound to make all the other hours of my day better and happier. And at length, my inventory becomes a regular part of everyday living rather than something unusual or set apart. And it goes on to say a little earlier in the paragraph, my inventory enables me to settle with the past. When this is done, I'm really able to leave it behind. When my inventory is carefully taken and I have made peace with myself, the conviction follows that tomorrow's challenges can be met as they come. And I have made peace with the pain and the sorrow and the grief and the trauma of my past. And it started with the step 4, and it started by giving it away in my step 5. Today I have a beautiful, tender, loving, mutually supportive and kind relationship with all my parents, with my dad and his wife of 20 years, and with my mom and my pop. My pop's been in my life since I was 11 years old. And that has come because I have changed by working these 12 steps, these 12 traditions, and these 12 concepts of service. And I just wrote an op-ed piece, for example, for a major newspaper about a social justice subject that's really important to me. And my dad was the first person I sent it to read. And he just wrote back, great work, kid. I completely support you. When I was campaigning for the presidential candidate of my choice, who, by the way, my mom thinks is a total whack job, and I think the person she supports is actively doing harm. My mom came to hear me speak and campaign on behalf of the candidate of my choice. She showed up in the green room. She was there early. She had on her full Betty hair and makeup. And she, interacted with everyone who was there from the campaign staff and was gracious and lovely. And when I was done speaking, she said, "Oh my God, you were perfect. They're so lucky to have you." We don't just tiptoe around each other's lives as cautious, invited guests. We are fully integrated into each other's lives and activities today. And that's the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. It says in step 8 in this book that our woes are caused by our trouble with relationships. And my relationships are healed today as a result of this program and working the steps and our other legacies. And so giving these inventories away in my step 5 and getting, conscientious guidance from a sponsor who's also a 3 legacy woman, and then taking a look at my step 6 and my step 7, where I'm long on certain behaviors, where I'm short on other behaviors, looking at my survival strategies and where they don't serve me anywhere. Where did they keep me alive? Where did they keep me defended and armored? Where they kept me defensive and shut down, has been integral to softening, to opening my heart, to learning how to stay, how to be present. And I'll jump ahead here to the step 11 in the prayer of St. Francis, which is offered to us in the 12 and 12. I practice the meditation that's suggested in step 11 by using the prayer of St. Francis, and the way I've been using it lately. And Bill talks about this also in his letter on emotional sobriety, is I say, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, may I be present. Where there is anger, may I be present. Where there is doubt, may I be present. Where there is despair, may I be present. And then I continue through the prayer in that way, because my hope is that I can just stay, that I can bring the fullness of myself and not run, not hide, not escape, not medicate, not control, or in Bill's words, not dominate or depend, but just stay, have the we of the first word and just participate in relationship and community and fellowship and just be there. So, my step 8, I'm always looking at where I'm out of integrity. That's what a lot of what step 8 is about, is where I've gotten out of joint, where my relationships are a little bit out of kilter, and where I want the opportunity to come back into alignment and harmony with my fellows. And so I have a really robust journaling practice, which is how I take a look at my daily inventory. And I just reflect on, the questions that the book proposes. What did I pack into the stream of life? Where was I selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, and afraid? There are amazing inventory questions in step 4 in the 12 and 12. And then I consider, am I willing to make direct amends to the person right away? Am I needing to wait a little bit because I'm not quite willing? I'm caught up in some self. I feel like it's more their fault than my fault. And then this third column in my step 8 is, I'm not ever going to make amends to that person, and I'm being stubborn and hateful and self-righteous. And then I need to pray about that. I need to talk to my sponsor about that, need to see what character of defect is being activated there. And then I move on to step 9, because I need to stay really active in all my steps and make my direct amends. And then I notice over time that because I have placed my life and my will and my actions in the care of my higher power, and I keep working the program, that I soften around these people where I don't want to make direct amends, and I become willing to make amends to them. If I'm working the program in all areas of my life, and I'm thinking in particular about the traditions and the concepts, and tradition 1, where am I practicing common welfare and unity? Where am I participating in an informed group conscience? And concept 4, where am I participating and creating harmony by letting others participate? Concept 3, where am I allowing others to make decisions? And am I participating in a decision in a healthy and appropriate way? And concept 5, is there a minority voice who needs to speak up and be heard and validated? Am I a minority voice who has the right and the duty and the obligation to speak up and be heard? Concept 12, am I placing myself in unqualified authority over someone else? Am I letting someone be an unqualified authority over me? Is something punitive? Is something an incitement to controversy? Is everything democratic in thought and action? I mean, these are all questions that I ask myself as I think about, have I harmed someone? Is someone harming me? And all of this goes into these reflections go into my journaling in the morning, which is a part of my inventory and reflecting on myself. And then that brings me to, the step 10 promises and the step 11 promises, which is that, alcoholism and drinking is not an issue for me today. I never think about drinking. It doesn't cross my mind. I can be around alcohol. My partner drinks a beer when he gets home from work. Alcohol was served actually at my sponsor's house last night when I went to her home for a small dinner party. I recoil as if from a hot flame. I react sanely and normally. Those promises are just a natural part of my experience with alcohol as a result of walking through these steps and applying them as best I can and integrating them into my spirit and flexing them in my spiritual muscles. And I want to tell you a story about being in Africa last January and February, when I had a physical catastrophic accident in the rainforest at 4:00 in the morning, when I tripped and fell over something and my leg broke in 4 places. And I also had a deep injury to my peroneal nerve, and my foot was paralyzed. And because of where I was in the second lung of the planet, in a place it takes 2 days to get to by airplane and motorbike and by walking, I did not have medical attention for 55 hours. And there was no pain medicine. There was no splint. And I just absolutely had to gut it out. And the first phase of this experience was lying on the rainforest floor for 5 hours. And that included someone with his bare hands taking my misshapen leg where the bones were crooked and trying to bend them back into something that resembled straight so that I could be put on a piece of fabric in a makeshift hammock and carried through the rainforest for 3 hours over rough terrain and across rivers. And the remarkable thing about this experience is that while I was in extraordinary physical agony, as you can imagine, and I was in shock, as I look back on that experience and reflect, there was some emotional sobriety there, because I was able to experience all of my physical pain and do the things that I needed to do, like bite on a stick and howl like an animal. But somehow I didn't take my pain out on the people around me. I didn't make it other people's fault. And I was able to say things like, may I please have a drink of water? And thank you. And I appreciate that you're sitting with me. And I don't know how I was able to do those kinds of statements, except that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and the experience of the 12th step was with me. And the other thing that I was cognizant of is that I could not have any expectations as to what this experience was going to look like and when, in fact, I was going to get any kind of help, because I knew it could potentially take days, which it did. It took over 2 days. And the person who was sitting with me, she started to have expectations and say, someone will be here soon. Someone will be here soon. There's going to be a satellite phone coming. There will be a medevac. There will be a helicopter. And I had to say to her, I don't have any expectations. And I was thinking about our story, acceptance is the answer, and how expectations equal premeditated resentments. And I thought about this book I had just read the day before about the spirituality of the 12 steps. And in that book, which was written by, an outside person who's a big fan of AA, he said he believes that our higher power suffers with us. And I believed that my higher power was suffering with me and that was enough. And then the real censure of the deal is that they offered me alcohol to numb my physical pain. Latoka, it's the stuff that's brewed locally that is very popular. And I declined alcohol. I said, no, thank you, because my sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous was more important to me than 4 broken bones and a nerve injury. And I was not going to come to the lunch bunch in Greeneville, Tennessee, and tell you that I drank in the rainforest over this injury, because I believe that Alcoholics Anonymous is enough to keep me sober under all causes and all conditions and in all circumstances of life. And our newcomers who are here today with 1 day, with 76 days, fixing to celebrate a year, I wanted to be able to share with you that you can stay sober in spite of and no matter what. And that's what it says in our book. Job or no job, husband or no husband, we can stay sober. And my first sponsor, she said to me that we can get sober in a chicken coop if that's what it takes. So I guess that brings me to step 12, the theme of which is the joy of living. And, recovery from this accident is long. My leg is healed, but there have been some additional health shocks, immune system shocks, cortisol and hormonal shocks. So a lot of things to walk through. But the upside has been that I get to do a lot of service in AA, and I feel very connected to my community here. And I feel very connected to my partner and very loved and supported, and I lied in bed for 3 months and I knew how to ask for help. And people showed up and stayed with me for a week at a time, rotating in and out. And whether it was people physically lifting my leg or helping me go to the bathroom, or my faith community dropping off a hot meal every afternoon at 4:30. People were there for me. And, it wasn't, I didn't have everything I wanted, but I had everything that I needed. And I just want to switch and tell you a short little story about relationships, and then I'll close. So, you know what? I think that that's good enough. I think that I've shared with you a lot, and that we can leave it for there. I hope that I've had an opportunity to share with you a little bit about what it was like and what happened and what it's like now. And that, it's one thing to put the plug in the jug, which is very important. I needed to get my physical sobriety and physical abstinence from alcohol, but that by working the 12 steps, we're promised this emotional sobriety as well, that we can make peace even in the most damaged and turbulent relationships. And then we can stay sober in spite of what life may throw at us. And that AA gives us a safe container in which we can fall apart if that's what life needs us to do. And that a spiritual awakening that we're promised in step 12 is being able to see, feel, hear, and do things which we previously could not see, hear, feel, and do. And those things can become normal. They can become a normal way of life, one day at a time, in the fellowship and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. So thank you so much, Glenn, again, for the opportunity to be with you today. It's a pleasure and a delight. And thank you so much, and peace be with you.